So here, this model kind of adds a little bit of a dimension that you might find useful, you know, maybe not. I definitely have found it beneficial personally with clients to help them understand the feeling showing up. And in a conversation with Kirk Strossel, which you'll see in the committed action segment, he actually refers, it's funny how it's, I haven't learned this from anyone, it was just over time and exploration and asking myself the question, but there is a model, I can't remember its name, but he does mention it in neuropsychology, which seems to kind of have a similar concept. So anyway, let's begin. So I want to start here with the concept of harmony. You know, I like music. Just give me 1 second. I'm going to get my guitar, which is lacking a string, but it should still work for the purpose of this example. So you kind of see with music, there is things can be in harmony, and the minimum requirement for harmony is what? What do you need as a minimum for harmony? You need one note and two. You need two notes. Two notes. Now let me just kind of put two together here. It's a bit out of tune, but that's probably good. That's probably good. You can kind of hear that that's okay, but it's not. It's actually it's not really in harmony. Like, listen to that together. Just kind of close your eyes and listen to this. Now, how does that sound to you? Now, would you buy the CD or I guess, gosh, that's how old I am. Would you download, the MP3 or watch the YouTube clip or whatever we do now, if it sounded like that? So we kind of see that with we're actually talking about dissonance here, so it's different. I'm just going to skip forward. I'm just going to skip forward to this one. That is a great example of dissonance, and it doesn't sound very nice, in a way. It doesn't sound very nice. So I'm just going to change this. Give me 1 second. Okay, so sorry, I was just getting this right in tune. So now what we can see is that when tone 1 and tone 2 actually are in harmony, you hear it. It sounds different. I'll even add a third. You can hear it, and your ear just picks up that that's in harmony. Whereas before, I can't remember what it was like, but I'll just sort of mess up with these things and it's a little bit off. So this isn't a music lesson, but this is to illustrate a point. What we kind of see is that in music, in perception, we hear dissonance, we perceive dissonance, and we perceive harmony. And this is sort of the foundation for which I'm going to kind of put forward a consideration. It is a consideration. It is not the only reason we experience emotions, but it is one perspective that I've kind of seen that sheds an interesting light on the concept of emotions themselves. So music is going to be our foundation. We're going to talk about harmony as the foundation. So in this model, we see that we have harmony and dissonance, and we're going to kind of call tone 1. Tone 1, I'm going to replace tone 1 because obviously this is a psychological thing. We're not talking literal music here, but we're talking tone 1, the first tone, the musical note, let's say, is the reality that I see. In other words, what I see. And tone 2 is what I seek. Now, what I'm saying is that these two things can either be in harmony, like I just showed you, or in disharmony, like I just showed you. Let's say in a psychological sphere. Now, we're not in the musical sphere, we're in the psychological sphere. What I see and what I seek can be in harmony or dissonance. What is what I see? What I see can be one of two things. If you remember in the ACT matrix, this is taken straight from there, there are the vertical line. The vertical line represents the top. We can see things as they are. The external world, our five senses experience of what's happening, we have that experience of reality. And we have the bottom, the bottom of the vertical line in the ACT matrix, which is our internal seeing, our internal world, what we experience internally. Both are incorporated in the concept of what I see, the reality that I see. This top left thing is what I am seeing. The top right, again, what I seek. What I seek can be literally in my five senses experience. I seek things right now that I want. I want, I want to eat this thing, or I want to see this thing, or I want to smell this thing. What I seek more often, I would say, even, we could argue, is in the internal world. The things that I seek, like happiness or contentment or connection or fulfillment or achievement or popularity or beauty or whatever it is, what I seek. And so what I kind of just simply put forward here, simple, is that what I see and what I seek can either be in harmony or dissonance. And when it is harmony or dissonance, it will create an emotional experience. Let me kind of put it this way. What I see and what I seek, when they are in harmony, it will create a certain emotional experience. When it is disharmony, it will create a different emotional experience. Analogous to what you heard with the guitar. When the two notes were in harmony, it created a certain perceptual experience of, we call that dissonance or disharmony. And when the notes were in harmony, it creates a different perceptual experience in your ear, which is, we call it harmony. So let's focus on dissonance, or in other words, when there is a gap. When there is a gap between what I see and what I seek. When there is a gap between what I see and what I seek, remember we said it creates an emotional experience, and what I would put forward is that this is where difficult emotions show up. Basic perspective on difficult emotions is that they arise as a signal informing us of a dissonance or a gap between that which we see happening here, either internally or externally, and that which we seek. There's a dissonance between the two. Now, let's kind of just pause here for a second. Let's kind of pause here with a very kind of simple example. Prior gave the example of your partner eating the last piece of chocolate when you wanted it, and I think I bring it up because it's probably happened in my relationship a couple of times, and you don't want to do it anyway. So when what you see is that the last chocolate is gone, and what you were seeking was not what you were seeking was to eat that chocolate, but it wasn't just like, I just want to eat that chocolate. Like, there wasn't just an external, there was also this internal image that you had about what that moment would be like when you open the fridge and you take that last piece, and you know how nice it's been, and you can just sit down after a hard day and just eat that bit of chocolate, and then that's what you seek, right? And then you open the fridge and you look and it's gone. And furthermore, you yell out, have you seen that last bit of chocolate? And your partner says, oh yeah, I finished that one off. We'll have to get another one, eh? And then that moment there, dissonance with what you seek. I'm making fun. I'm doing this to, hopefully it makes sense. I'm doing this to kind of help this make dissonance shows up. The emotion is what, just note to yourself how you'd feel, if you really were longing for that moment there, just as an example, and then you might notice, anger, frustration, sadness, or how far it would go, despair. I don't know how far it would go, but for some it might be just a little disappointment. From others it might be, feeling incredibly overwhelmed that chocolate is gone. But either way, we see a similar flavor of emotion. The degree of dissonance may differ, but it's dissonance. Now, when dissonance shows up, there is a problem solver that comes in, or a commenter, I could say, that comes in, and it's the mind. So in this model, what we kind of see, it kind of stems from one of the analogies I liked from Russ Harris a long time ago. He said, the mind is a great problem-solving machine. And what I kind of took from that is that in order for the mind to become great at solving problems, it must also become quite good at perceiving problems. It must be able to perceive them too, in order to, so in other words, as soon as there's a problem that shows up, there's the mind ready to go. Here I am, on duty, on task, I've been called in, contract, and here I go. So what I'm saying here is that when dissonance shows up, if dissonance reflects that what I see was different to what I sought, in other words, that's a problem. A problem is usually when what is happening is different to what is ideally happening. Then the difficult emotion signals and flags the mind to come in. Mind, we need you here. This is the start of problems. This is the start of potential problems, because when the mind comes in, what happens with us is that we tend to get caught up in it. Are you kind of seeing this flow? So dissonance shows up, problem, mind shows up, because it's the problem solver, and then we attend to that mind completely. In other words, fusion, that's the cognitive fusion in ACT terminology. We become caught up in, hooked by, we devote our attention to the thoughts. The thoughts dominate our attention. And this makes sense. Like if you think historically that whenever there was, if there's a problem, the mind comes in to solve the problem, then the problem solver should be given attention. And typically, in life, in real life problems, many of the time, that makes so much sense, doesn't it? If there's a crocodile, I'm using crocodiles as if they're here, but anyway, if a crocodile is chasing you and you, well, as much as you can, if you're in the water, you see a crocodile and that's a reality gap, right? Reality I see is there's a crocodile going to eat me, and the reality I seek is at least to survive my life. Then the difficult emotion signals the mind. The mind can kind of look for an escape. In a sense, you're looking for an escape. You find a tree. If you don't attend to what your mind is coming up with, if you don't attend to that thought, and instead, if you just stay very present, noticing the water, notice how the water feels, enjoying the sunlight on your head, you might get eaten. So what I'm saying is that it makes sense to pay attention to the mind. However, oftentimes what's happened, as I'll talk about more, is that this has become a default orientation. In other words, it's become default for us to attend to what our mind is saying, even when there might not be it might not be helpful. That's why I wanted, even when what the mind is generating might not have utility value to our lives. We don't consider that necessarily with fusion. It is almost a reflex. Let's just leave it with that. Now, so when the fusion happens with our thoughts, in other words, we're starting to get stuck in the thoughts. Like, let's use our example before. So you're thinking, why am I even in this relationship? Maybe that's a later point. I'm going to exaggerate this to make the point. But let's say, you start having thoughts like, oh, I really wanted to have that chocolate. Now I can't enjoy my afternoon. That might come in. Or like, how can you be so inconsiderate? Or how can she be so inconsiderate? When I always ask them first, and they've just eaten this last piece. So you can see the mind starting to churn up. It's starting up, and what you'll notice is that when we start to get fused with thoughts, this becomes the reality that we're seeing. Can you see that? Because remember, the reality that we see is, what is it? It is both the reality that we see externally and the reality we see internally. Fusion creates a new internal reality. Now, you might actually notice here that we can create I don't know if you've caught this already, but just catch this. We now could have a potential catastrophe from this. We could have a catastrophe if we're unable to notice and step back from this pinball machine of processes that bounce around. Because what I see is that there's an initial reality gap. I don't have the chocolate. What I seek was the chocolate. Difficult emotion. I'm disappointed. Let's just start with disappointed. Then the mind comes in with the thought that I always I always ask before I take the last piece. Why hasn't he asked? He doesn't even care about me. And then that's the new reality I see. He doesn't care. He doesn't care is a very different, and I would argue, I would maybe put forward perhaps larger reality gap, more dissonant note from a different reality that I seek. Not only is there a gap now in not having the chocolate, but there's a gap now because the mind has kind of suggested that in this relationship there is no care, and the reality I seek might be, care and fairness and love, and so now we have more difficult emotions than just disappointment. That there's perhaps bitterness or anger, and you can imagine how this might cascade. Even there's a silly example. I'm not saying that this is literally what would happen, but I'm just demonstrating that even if that person got to the point of then their mind then saying, they're feeling frustrated, they're feeling angry. How could he do this? I would never do it. He doesn't care. And then let's say the mind eventually churns up the thought, well, what's the point of being in this relationship if someone else can't even ask about a chocolate? How can I even trust them to consider me in bigger things in life? When when, whatever it is. And what I'm saying is that now we've got these cascade of emotions, these huge reality gaps, and this is eventually the overwhelm leads to oh, sorry, there's a great little picture of fusion. You can kind of see SpongeBob getting fused. The overwhelm that's happening leads to the other side, experiential avoidance. Experiential avoidance, doing things to try and escape or minimize or kind of, way, like we said in the top left of the ACT matrix. This is the same thing, the same box, top left of the ACT matrix. Things we do to try and minimize and get rid of our pain. In other words, if we kind of liken difficult emotions, I've got that signal, symbol there, you can see next to the word difficult emotions. If we liken that to like your petrol light, when you're driving, I don't know if I had one of those old Toyota Seekers, those cars, I think 1990 something model. Great car. I think it's still driving. Anyway, as a student, as some of you might know, that you're not always, don't have a lot of financial backing, in a sense. And so the petrol light was often on in my vehicle. And now if your petrol light was on and I came to you and I said to you, don't worry, I've got this hammer. We can just break the light. We can just smash that light. It won't be on. Yes, that will resolve the difficult emotion. Yes, that will eliminate the petrol light. But in this model, what I'm kind of highlighting is that the hammer it's targeting the wrong thing, just like so let me say that again. Experiential avoidance is targeting the wrong thing in the like way that a hammer breaking a petrol light would not be solving the problem. Difficult emotions are not the problem. They are the signal. What I'm putting forward in this model is that they are the signaling a potential dissonance between what you are seeing and what you seek. A potential dissonance between the two. And simply by avoiding or trying to escape the emotion, we do as good a solution as it is if we basically just break a petrol light when it comes on in the car. The point is we're still running out of fuel potentially. It's not a long-term solution. So let's take an example with this model. Let's take a bit more of a clinical example. This is a real example here. And the client that I was seeing had an affair in the relationship, and their partner had broken up with them. So now this is the reality that he saw. I've cheated on my partner. They've broken up with me. I'm by myself at home mostly now, and I look like a loser now. Some of these things we could say are literal things that he sees. Some of these things are things that he sees in his internal world. Like, I look like a loser is sort of a perception, either way, this is what he sees. And now what we kind of see is that on the other side, this is some of the stuff that I could say that he sought, in his in-tune model. Companionship, connection, integrity as a value, loyalty, enjoyment, fun, popularity, and to be thought of well. These are some of the things that we could say that he seeks. And so naturally, you can kind of see that there's a dissonance between what he sees and what he seeks. There's a gap between the two. And the emotions that showed up really were primarily loneliness and guilt. Loneliness because of his value and the reality he seeks for companionship and connection, and guilt because I guess of focused on the values he has for integrity. I want to highlight about this model is that it's kind of emphasizing that emotions themselves are not, we've kind of looked at them positive or negative. In a sense, yes, some are more comfortable to have than others. In other words, it's nicer to hear a guitar that's in tune than not. But the guitar that's not in tune is not bad. It's just unpleasant to hear. It itself is not characteristically bad. It's reflective of being out of tune. If there was no desirable tune, if there was no desirable way of notes being organized that sounds good, then it's not out of tune. I don't know if this is making sense. Let me say this another way. This person cheating on their partner and being at home mostly now is not necessarily in itself dissonant. It is dissonant because it's inconsistent with what is sought. Both, remember what we said, minimum of two things required to create a harmony is two notes. In the same way that the realities that we see can only create harmony or dissonance emotionally in comparison with a reality that we seek. This is kind of one perspective that I'm putting forward, is that both must exist to some degree. And both, so we kind of see in this example that loneliness and guilt show up as primarily, and then here comes the mind. Mind comes in, and this was some of the thoughts that he was kind of getting hooked by. I'll never find anyone again. There's a prediction of his mind. I'm a bad person, a judgment. I'll be alone forever, a prediction. They're going to find someone else, another prediction. I'm not doing anything worthwhile, a judgment. What's the point of trying? What's the point of trying? A justification, right? A justification for not trying. There's no point of not trying. When we talk about fusion, we'll talk more about this, but we kind of will talk about how, the thoughts that we fuse, we generally come in a few categories, mainly judgments, justifications or reason giving, rules, and predictions or time traveling, And so we kind of see all of those flavors in this set. Don't worry about that too much till we get to the talk on fusion. But what I do see here is that when this stuff becomes, remember, when you fuse with something, it becomes the reality you see. So when this stuff shows up, this becomes the reality he sees. And now notice, because of other values that he holds, notice what these new realities being, becoming his reality that he sees, coming into the music, so to speak. When this comes into the music, notice how much more dissonant his emotional experience. Not only is there loneliness and guilt, but now there's I'm a bad person, inadequacy, boredom, there's no point trying, there's worthlessness, there's despair, hopelessness. So what I'm saying is that you can see how this cascade, this kind of this pinball machine of events take place, ultimately bringing us to, a lot of the time, experiential avoidance. Not necessarily ultimately. It could be straight away. It could be an automatic reflex. As soon as we feel loneliness and guilt, we can go to experiential avoidance. I'm just saying, I'm just expressing it this way for this particular client. But in a sense, for him, although you might not see it because the video is there right now, but if you can see the slides that hopefully you've been able to download for this talk, there's experiential avoidance behaviors, maybe drinking or drugs, maybe watching pornography or going out to parties to feel better. Whatever it is, this is the top left box of the ACT matrix. Here we're looking at what is the person doing to try and feel better, in a sense. What is the person doing to try and escape their feelings? Like the other models, the choice point and the ACT matrix, I guess what I've tried to do with this model is to kind of just help us to organize what is being seen. In other words, what are the feelings, what are the thoughts, what are the behaviors that you do in response to those thoughts and feelings, to get away from them. So we've got the features of the matrix organized differently, but also we're kind of also inviting an exploration around what are you seeing and what are you seeking? What are you seeking? What is important to you? And so here we're going to kind of talk a little bit about, I guess, how to use this in treatment. So let's kind of break down the different parts of this, because it's not so simple as what I see and what I seek is not always so clear cut. And so we're going to start with what I seek, and we're just going to open this up. The things that we seek, we can kind of broadly classify them in three ways. I can imagine, just this is not an exhaustive list, but just three things that I see can form part of what I seek. One is the values that we hold. That's part of what I seek, what I want, values. The second thing is what I want, things I want, which might be different to values, in a sense. And then rules, what I think I should, the word should kind of, I should have, or I should be like. Rules, ways that we, values, what is most important. Rules might be ways that we evaluate ourselves, in a sense. And if you listen to the conversation with Steve Hayes from week 1, we touch on this concept here, on the difference between values and rules a little bit. And we're going to talk more about that in the following workshop. on values. But to start with, one way that I kind of, look at this is sort of imagining, and I've got the two pictures, the two sort of symbols there of wheat and a black kind of version of wheat. And it's based on a kind of a bit of a metaphor story, that I share on this concept in looking at, what I seek. What is what I seek? And the story goes, that there was a farmer one day who went to plant wheat in his field. He was a wheat farmer, and he goes and plants this wheat in his field. And as he's kind of finished off, he goes home, and then that night there is an enemy farmer, a competitor, if you will, who comes and plants weeds all through his own wheat. So in a sense, if you imagine now that the field is full of, yes, wheat and weeds that are both there. And so in this story, the farmer, knowing that the enemy had planted these weeds, let's say he had security cameras or something, he found that the enemy planted the weeds. He realizes that he can't actually take them out because they look exactly like the wheat when they start growing. So he has to wait till they're fully grown and fully developed before he starts separating them. And so in this story, the types of weeds planted are a type of weed called a tare, T-A-R-E. I haven't got a picture here, but tares look exactly like wheat. The only difference is you can't actually make them into bread. They're a weed. They look the same visually, or they're slightly different. Tares are slightly greener, you could say. So you can sort of tell the difference, but they look very, very similar. And so in this sort of analogy, we have kind of what I see as is the field of the reality that I seek, or the field of this box here. In other words, saying that what I seek in life is made up of values, the wheat, but also rules and wants, which I'm going to call the weeds. In other words, things that might have a very close resemblance to the values, but their foundation, their root is perhaps different, or the use of them, they're utilized differently in your life. So let me give you an example. I might have a value of excellence. Let's say I value excellence. In other words, whatever I do, I want to do it well, and I want to put a high degree of intentionality and care in what I do. Excellence as a value. Excellence is different to the rule of I need to achieve highly in order to be good enough. Both are in the column of what I seek, but the way that they are pursued and held is different. I don't know if you can see that. I need to achieve highly, otherwise I'm not good enough. If I don't achieve highly, I'm inadequate. I haven't done a good enough job. Versus I value excellence. You can see they're pursued from a different foundation. One is pursued freely out of will. The other is pursued almost compulsorily out of mandate that you hold against yourself. So here, there's a bit of work to be done with the individual on a values level, where we're kind of helping people not only to clarify what is this column, but to sift amongst it. And so again, in this model of formulation, what I'm doing here is showing how you could work using the model on different aspects, how you could kind of open up different aspects to invite processes of ACT. So here you'd work on helping clients to differentiate and sift between these things, which we're going to talk about in the next workshop. Oh, yeah, that's what we're doing. So in terms of ACT, we can kind of see these three processes would come in. We're going to be clarifying values. We're also going to be using the self as context process, which is learning to sort of step back from stories that you hold of yourself. For example, the high achiever story in this kind of context. And so we're going to be using that process as well in this work, and diffusion, helping people to step back to be able to see the things that they're fused with in this column that they, that they want. Talking about rules I've explained, but wants sometimes people kind of see as not different to values. What I'd say is, if you kind of look at the root word of want, where it originally came, the root word of want, where it came from, was a Latin word vont, which meant to lack something. So I would say that we could kind of put forward a perspective of the word want as the desiring the things that we just don't have, not necessarily what we value, but simply because of our lack of it, it forms into this column. And what I'll emphasize is that regardless which one it is, regardless if it's a value, a rule, or a want, if the reality you see is dissonant to it, the difficult emotion I would put forward is still experienced. So even if I have a rule that I need to achieve highly, even if it's not necessarily even if it's sort of, there's values in it, but it's not value founded, like it's not built on the value. If I'm holding that as a rule and the reality that I see is that I, don't do well in an exam or something, I'll still feel that difficult feeling. Does that make sense? If I'm tied to, if I'm fused with that rule, if I'm fused with a particular want, like I really want a new car, I really want a new car, and if I find that the reality I see is that I don't have enough money for it, I'll still feel frustrated or sad or disappointed, relevant to the degree that I'm fused with that want. Can you kind of see? So the concept of ACT is that we are hopefully trying to help people to become more connected to what they value and more aware from this noticing point of view of the other things that they are pursuing in their life as directions, rules, and wants. On the other side of this this model, we have the what I see. Let's open that up. And here we're kind of looking at what is influencing what the person sees. Is it literally the objective? Is it literally an objective thing that they're observing? Is it a five senses experience? Is it an internal experience? And so we have two ways. Remember the two kind of pictures that we've got above what I see. What I see can be literally what I see, such as in the previous example, I have cheated on my partner. That is a literal thing that you can see. You've acknowledged that occurrence. And then there's the internal experience, the internal additions, which is, I'm going to be alone forever. That's also what you see, but that's that's an internal thing. And so what I can see here is that if we kind of look at this, let me put it this way. If you kind of imagine that what you see, your five senses experience, can largely be informed by your internal experience, as I've put that down there. So for example, if you have an internal perception of yourself as a failure and inadequate and not good enough, and then you don't do well in a test, the reality you see might be very different to if you didn't have those beliefs about yourself and you didn't do well on a test. Attribution style, if you remember that from the old psychology, classes, or counseling sort of classes, anything that you've done in that light, Psych 101 type thing, you sort of learn about attribution style, how we attribute certain experiences, in turn, dispositionally or situationally. All this plays a role. In other words, you could kind of look at this from a schema or a CBT lens, which is that the pre-existing sort of beliefs that we hold influence what we see. In other words, the internal lens that we look at reality through will influence what we see. Hope that makes sense. But here, in terms of ACT, we're going to be looking at the concept of presence, kind of looking at helping clients to actually show up to what is in distinction or diffusion from what the mind is adding to reality. So in other words, here we can see that difficult emotions can arise whether the actual what is seen is not necessarily different to what we seek. In other words, our interpretation of what we see can look dissonant to what we seek, even if what actually is seen, what actually is not dissonant. I'm going to try to give you an example because I know that sounds confusing. It's sort of like, well, let's go the silly chocolate example. You come and you see that someone else, ate the chocolate, and what you see is that they didn't consider you, like they didn't even care, and so you feel frustrated because what you seek is for them to care and for them to at least, ask you. That's what you seek. But then let's say you find out that they threw it away because it started to go moldy. I mean, I don't know, no chocolate, I don't know how long it takes for chocolate, but it's an example. Chocolate goes moldy, and so you find that out. Now, all of a sudden, you kind of see that your reality gap was misinformed. Here, we see one of the CBT's proponents for why we experience, psychological distress is because of a distorted perception. I guess I'm putting forward in this model that's absolutely one possibility. And so learning to kind of be more present to what's happening and defuse from unhelpful thoughts or old patterns of thinking that are influencing what we're seeing it can be an important part of therapy. I don't think I don't think ACT ignores that. But I think in this model, what I'm trying to highlight is that it's not the only source of potential reason why we experience our distress. Equally, having a distorted what I seek can be a part, like we just covered before. And now we see this one. Let's keep moving forward. We can blow up now the fusion perspective here. And in here, what we're kind of looking at is helping, obviously, naturally with diffusion. Here we're helping to address the process of cognitive commentary that's going on. We're looking at what the mind is saying and whether that is helpful in its impact on us in terms of when we get hooked or fused with those things. So we're helping clients to also become more, you could say, aware of what's going on, more present, more able to notice what's going on and in their mind, and able to kind of discern whether this is helpful or unhelpful. And on this last level, the experiential avoidance side, we are kind of looking here at how to help clients to become aware of the pattern of their behaviors and the function of those behaviors. A lot of the time, experiential avoidance, like I've said, is seen as a solution to overwhelming emotions. In other words, we try and escape the feelings we don't want. But most of the time, we don't actually see that this isn't working and it's actually making life worse. And this is the part of ACT which we bring in to this side of the formulation model, as when we get into treatment, is we're highlighting to clients what they're currently doing, how it's working, and how it's actually making life maybe better in the short term, worse in the long term, in a sense. If that's the case. So with experiential avoidance, we're obviously kind of going to be talking about experiential acceptance, the willingness to feel difficult feelings because the agenda of trying to escape them is not only not working, it's meaning that the more that they do these behaviors, in the example, it was like binge watching Netflix, or it could be, drinking or drugs or watching pornography, I think was in the example, these things aren't actually working to escape your feelings for good, and they're making your life work. They're pulling you further from your values. So that's the part that we'd be talking about when we're addressing this. There'd also be the part of awareness. You could kind of call this the observing self. It's still the self as context process here, which is just the ability to become aware of what we're doing. I think you could say that this part forms a part of all the different aspects of this model. And to kind of try and avoid confusion, I just want to emphasize what I'm going through here is saying once you've got the formulation all filled in, once you've got the picture of what they see and what they seek and the emotions that creates, and then the thoughts that stem from that and the experiential behaviors they turn to, then that kind of forms the basis upon which you can then decide on different approaches, different parts of ACT you can kind of introduce. I'm mindful we haven't gone through these parts yet, so talking about them now might seem confusing. Don't worry, give it time, and these pieces hopefully come together. Maybe you can watch this video again once you've finished the workshop and then come back to formulation again with that awareness of the 6 processes of ACT. But for now, just emphasizing that we'd want to address this part of our clients. There is one more that we want to talk about, and it's the top aspect. In this model, what we highlight is that if we're is that shooting the messenger is not the solution, neither is it giving your full attention to the messenger the solution. In other words, there are 2 approaches we have with painful feelings. One is the bottom left fusion, we kind of get stuck in it, or 2 is this, we get stuck in pushing it away. Neither is a faultless response that should be automated. In other words, both have potential problems if we're not able to choose them with wisdom and awareness in doing them. What I'm saying is that fusion and experiential avoidance aren't problems in themselves, but when they become automated responses to difficult feelings that we have and difficult thoughts, they can become problems. So once we've sorted some of that stuff out, we see that it's not, in a sense, what we've done is we've kind of eliminated or reduced the unhelpful responses, but we still have the dissonance potentially in life. For some clients that we see, there is an actual gap going on. There is an actual dissonance between what they see and what they seek, and it's not just the experiential avoidance stuff they're doing that's the problem. And so in this case, I think this is where we bring in two concepts, which is experiential acceptance or committed action. What am I saying here? Take a situation where you're experiencing difficult, emotions, in a sense. There are really two foundational options that we have when we experience dissonance. One is that we can accept the dissonance. In other words, we can make room for the experience of that emotion because of the reality of the dissonance. Oftentimes, maybe the dissonance is unmovable or unchangeable. Sometimes we might feel grief because the reality I see is that something or someone I love is not here anymore, and what I seek is more time with them, and I don't have that. And that's a great example of a dissonance that is, it's, you can't necessarily bring that person back or that thing back, In other cases, the dissonance might be something movable and changeable, I feel I feel guilty that I haven't, looked after my health enough. The reality I seek is that I'm healthy, and what I see is that I've been neglecting my health. Now here we might move to committed action. And these two aren't mutually exclusive. It's not that we would just do acceptance and not action, and action and not acceptance. Perhaps there's room for both. And this is part of the therapeutic process, is helping clients to actually work on, okay, if I'm not going to do this unhelpful stuff with my feelings and thoughts, what could I do instead? And here we're offering a more helpful, hopefully, direction, which is making room for these feelings rather than struggling with them, and doing what we can in the situations that we're in to move us towards our values. And that's what this kind of top part represents. So in this model, any one of these parts could be what we focus on.